Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spinner Rack, and we also have
Calvin Ellis ready to rock.
today we have the sad news to report that a couple days ago, Neal Adams passed away. He was 80 years old, and we're going to get into a little bit of history of Neal. Do you have any words you want to say to start out?
I am not a member of Neal Adams' family, and I know that the bereavement and the loss is all theirs. But I am genuinely moved by this. I have met Neal Adams a handful of times, cons and such. I had the chance to interview him a couple of times, and I had heard what happened with him with sepsis, and I heard that he was doing better. What I had heard is that he had pretty much beaten it, and then to hear that he died from complications of it was like such a boomerang at the end of the day. Really did hit me. I was genuinely looking forward to seeing him again. He was one of the staples of the con that I really look forward to seeing with him. He made me a better interviewer, whether he realized it or not. And it does sadden me, as he's again. I'm not his immediate family or anything, but I was definitely looking forward to seeing him again.
Yeah, I think we re-put up some, interviews that we had. One that Cal had done, one that I had done, but the second one Cal was there for, which we did the initial meetup with Neal, and he was in his own style informing us what we were doing wrong in trying to get interviews during the con, and say usually beginning through the beginning or after. He said, "Why don't you guys come back later?" And I guess it's the usual thing of I scared them away, and then I came back over, and he was ready to interview because some other people had said come back later and were gone at the Boston Con. But he sat me down next to him, got to ask him some questions, and I stuck to the current work, just since he had definitely I was happy to get the interview. I wanted to just highlight the stuff that he was doing now rather than just go through everything. I can say that would be the my Chris Farley moment when you did the X-Men. That was great, right? Yeah, stupid. Being in my head about it, but it was great to talk to him. And then I think later I met him at the what was it? I think it's at the Awesome Con, whatever con is in at the airport in Queens. And I was, as I normally do at his table, rustle around. I had bought stuff from there before, but I think he recognized me. And outside of buying something, he wanted, it seemed like he wanted to talk. So I was like, all right, this is a good point. We could just kind of talk about some
He,
things.
he was always down to talk. Um, Usually, whoever was with him there wasn't necessarily too sanguine with that whole thing. But
Yeah.
Adams was always. I mean, I had tried to get a bigger interview with him, and unfortunately, got nixed because it didn't seem like there was going to be any money in it. With the person, I wasn't speaking with him. I was speaking with, of course, his handler. But he was always down to talk. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, I got a chance to interview him three times, and it was the first time that was the one that was for me because I started speaking with him, and I was just asking general questions, and I could tell by the responses that I was like, okay, this is like dealing with your grandfather who's like, are you going to say something stupid now? Are you going to say something we both know the answer to? Or I'm here. Are you going to actually ask me some questions? Are you going to really, put some stuff to me? And that's when I stopped. I was like, okay, this is a guy who's been in the business. He knows the business. He doesn't. He just didn't seem like real old school in that he didn't have a lot of tolerance for a fool.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was something that I got real quickly. But it was also for me very liberating. I was like, oh, okay, I can, I don't have to do the soft shoe stuff. I can ask, I can ask some real questions. And it was fine. It was fine. It was it turned out to be it was a very nice interview, and it definitely changed my approach and my style for with dealing with creators. When I realized, hey, these guys do want to talk. Number one, and number two, don't just ask the fluff. You can ask some you can ask some questions, and they'll you'll be real surprised to find that they're more than happy to answer it.
Well, with that said, I mean, I just want to one of the things of talking with him. and hearing some of the the cut of his jib, that sort of thing that you were mentioning. And I think we were talking about. I asked him about Kirby, and he got a little bit heavy on it because I think he kind of was looking at it as a lot of hop on nostalgia that people were doing. That he was a name that no one kind of would
with
you
with,
know
with, with Kirby.
with Kirby, yeah, because he was like he wasn't an issue with Kirby, but how the nostalgia of people like
Well,
lad like.
he's right. He's 100% right on
But
that.
I'm just saying I'm bringing it up and to say that this is a person who not only was friends with him when things were negative towards Kirby. Here in this interview, and everyone talks about him kind of being abrasive and this, that, and the other. There's two strong points in this comic journal interview. We're talking to Gary Groth, who's now the one of the most hard edge Kirby did everything type of supporters, and in here Neal Adams says, Kirby's back. Kirby's doing Captain Victory. We got him drawing again. And then Gary Groth said, have you seen the work? And and,
Yeah,
and, and Neal Adams like, yeah, Kirby should just, whatever he wants to do, just,
just
something
let
to
him
that
do it.
effect. Just let
Just
him
let him
do it.
do
It's
it.
just great having him doing comic books. And, the idea that someone that's been drawing from the 40s to still be drawing in the 80s, but this is possibly like 2 years before Gary Groth did his interview with Kirby, where he kind of didn't push back on anything, and he just said, "This would be a good person to kind of be behind." But there's a period where he wasn't, to to pros, some pros, he was like still the man, but to a lot of other people, he wasn't. And Neal, in this interview, there's two things in here. There's also right before Walter Simonson had got it became big again from Thor. He'd already had the success with Manhunter. He had the success with Aliens, and at this point, he was doing Battlestar Galactica and Star Wars, in which he was working with finishers on it. And in this interview, he says, he said, I can talk about design. He said, design, people like Marshall Rogers, they're great in design, and Walter Simonson. Walter Simonson, he's doing some great work now. And I just can't, I know there's something big coming from him soon. And like a little while after that, Thor happens, and then the kids are like, hey, who's that new guy? Simonson. So a lot of people try to point out that, like his interviews are, like propping up himself, which anyone should do. But at the same time, this guy had done so much for comics, which we'll get into, that any pat of his own back is well deserved because he is a definite talent. Um, he not only inspiration, but actually that rough like your father. Even though he was a kid in the industry, when he got there, he did so much to sort of push the medium forward, and his way he instructed the people coming up under him was very harsh, but it got them to become better. So um yeah, I mean, this is a tough one, and it is everything Cal said about having that big Neil Adams stand with him there, that the person that done all this great work was still going to just be there for us as fans to see. But just to start out, he was one of the person that actually he didn't have to do comic books because he went to art school. He got involved with the newspapers and doing the news strips, doing advertising work at the same time too. So he knew where the money was, but he still had this drive to be a comic artist because I think, yeah, I can show it here. Where is this thing? I know it's not going to look good on this screen, but imagine, coming to doing art, showing your stuff, and the first thing you get is Ben Casey. If you know anyone remembers Ben Casey out there, he's doing a
Yes,
new- he's doing a newspaper strip with
man,
and
woman.
he's got all these this strip, so he's already made it. This is the big thing. Everyone in comics wanted to do a strip, and that's where a lot of the older pros they kind of wanted. Kirby, wanted to do a strip until, of course, they went to he was struggling with the strip. But that's really making it to be like the Charles Schutz. So to start your career, work on some doing ghosting work on a lot of strips, and then to get Ben Casey. I think he's as an artist, he was a big fan of Stan Drake and also big fan of Joe Kubert and the Kirby stuff with Wally Wood, which had very harsh lighting, and he brought all of his own illustrative stuff to it to do his sort of realism that was that had, I mean, you had some realistic stuff with Stan Drake, but in comic books you hadn't really seen that. So when he came to DC, he was kind of they didn't want any new people in there. He kind of like worked his way into DC because they weren't ready to take on new people. And this so just to say it, um, that you can go out there and find it. There are two printings of it, which is in the comic book marketplace, and they reprinted a later issue, which was Neal Adams, the DC years, is done by Arlen Schumer. If you see his book, he has a big display on Neal Adams and is the aficionado on Neal Adams, but they have this great article talking about him getting into, and it's a self portrait of Neal talking about the DC years and some of the things he did, not only with Batman and Superman, but with talking with Jack Adler and doing better coloring work and that sort of thing, and being involved with the DC, production staff at the same time, as well as bringing in great artists like Bernie Wrightson and what was it, Mike Kaluta, like those. I think there's one other that kind of slipping them into his little room in DC, and slowly that works. They started to get work at DC. So let me pass it off to you to start talking about some stuff about with his work at DC.
Oh, my introduction to Neal Adams' work was from the Ballantine covers he did on Tarzan, on the Tarzan paperbacks. That was the stuff that I'm gonna have to, because it's a long time ago that I'm seeing his art. But that was my introduction to it, and I was really big on Tarzan as a kid, and so I remember seeing those particular covers, and then I remember trying to track them down later in a hardcover. I
Mm-hmm.
remember trying to track the books down in hardcover, and they got them for me. And when I looked, I said, "But these aren't the right covers." And then, oh, you didn't tell us who did the covers. And I was like, "Well, who did these covers?" And
Mm-hmm.
then like, oh, it was Neal Adams. And I hadn't put two. It took a while because I didn't put two and two together with that. And then of course the bigger thing for me was the bigger draw were the Batman books where he was doing with Denny O'Neil, which I had owned a complete set of, sold for $100 and $100 store credit at the time. It was a great deal back then, kids. It was a great deal. But and then I had to end up rebuying everything, for a high, for a higher amount. But the amount of realism, as they would call it, that photorealistic art that he had, it was such a departure from what was going on in comics at the time. Now, and I want to say, it's not that other people couldn't have done that, but that's not what they were looking for in comics at the time. But this is what he was bringing forward. Comics were still coming out of comics historically are still coming out of comic strips, like the Yellow Kid and stuff of that nature, where the art is still cartoonish. It's more elastic in terms of what somebody can look like, and they aren't supposed to look like real people. They're still trying to keep that whole thing with this, with the strips at the end of the day, where you would have Dondi with just black, with just the little black opals and no real eyes or something of that nature. And then he comes in with this type, and it's just like you said with comics. Comics are like, hey, how did you get in here? Make certain nobody else can get in there this way ever again. So Neal Adams gets in that way, and then the art, he's doing like a ton of covers. I remember, we had already discussed this, that his interiors weren't necessarily looked upon very highly, but Carmine Infantino, who was a master cover artist himself, was like, look, you got to look at the covers this guy is doing, some really good stuff. And of course, it's almost like TOTUS now, like understatement in terms of saying that, because when you look at all the cover work that he did, at least for me, primarily on the Superman books, or even if you're a comic seller and you see how many books you can sell just based on the fact that Neal Adams did that cover.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rare cover that he did for Thor, or a rare cover that he did for Conan, and guys will, still after that particular art. Just just amazing at the end of the day. For me, as I always said, the biggest gripe I had was that he didn't do. I don't think in the 19, while he was at DC during the 70s, 80s, I don't think he did any Superman work with the exception of one book, which turns out to be a classic, at least now. Guys were hating on it at that time, and that's the Superman versus Muhammad Ali
Oh,
Treasury.
mm,
But every book was like, I would see the art and he did it, and then I would open it up and I was like, hey, this isn't the same guy. You can't fool me. I'm not buying this book. You're trying to cheat me, but that was a big draw. Neil Adams was on the cover, and Kurt Swan was the definitive Superman artist. And it would take me a while to warm up to Kurt Swan because of Neil Adams. But you look at the influence. I would think that this is somebody who gets, this is somebody who doesn't get enough recognition, in my opinion. But if there was a direct descendant of Neil Adams, it would probably be somebody like Joe Jusko, who is able to turn out these great pages with such detail and proportion, anatomy, the realism. But all of that is Neil Adams. It's everybody gets inspired by, you got the guys who get inspired by Jack Kirby, and then everyone else is Neil Adams. Everyone else is Neil Adams at the end of the day. They're the guys who are going to admit it, and then the guys who won't admit it, but they're all influenced, and you can see that in the detail of what they're doing. Or the early Bill Sienkiewicz stuff, Neil Adams. John Byrne, Neil Adams. Even if you went to somebody now, like who's a more current person, like Adi Gravnov or Jason Fabok, all that Neil Adams. Jim Lee, Neil Adams. And the amount of work, because this is not somebody who was limited to comics. This was somebody, if do just a quick search, you would see that he had did like interior pages, covers for books, just all over the place. If you're an Adams fan and you really are big on his art, you would spend a long time trying to track down like some really key pieces of things that he did. But he brought an incredible vibrancy to comics that was going to come, I think, one way or another. It was just a matter of time before somebody said, "Hey, why don't we make them look? Why don't we make them look like people, or a little bit more like people?" At the end of the day, but with the level of talent of a Neil Adams, because like we said, like you already alluded to, and we had discussed, this was a guy who didn't need to come into comics, who had a day job and was able to successfully do the day job, and was still knocking out these comics. And so I don't, somebody could have come, yeah, but with the same level of talent
mhm.
and the longevity of talent, because this is somebody who's even, up until the point where he took ill, this was someone who could still turn out quality work, and turn. I mean, you have guys now who are supposedly rock star artists, and they can't finish a series. Neil Adams could. Neil Adams was in his 70s and could still knock out, a full, a Batman Odyssey or Superman, the coming of the Superman, whatever it may be, or do a month's worth of covers for every single DC title. His again, that talent level is something that is probably not going to be repeated. I mean, there was only one Kirby, and there's only one Neil Adams at the end of the day. But what's the saying? I have to credit it to Barry Gordy. It's that, what he said, some people come along once in a lifetime, some people once in a generation, and some people just come along once. And I believe that's going to be Neil Adams. It's just the level of talent, the amazing art, and then the influence at the end of the day, where he has just left his mark on so many, on the comic industry altogether, and it's an indelible one. It's just amazing, without a doubt.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that
Mm.
you know, is looking at it and saying at this career and saying some of the such the quality work, but then also be one of the guys to be like, all right, let me force my way into Batman and then be able to help save Batman, which was close to cancellation, where they're just like my approach to it is just like saying, all right, I'm gonna do everything by night, and then instead of him walking through doors, he's gonna come in through the windows. And then slowly, Julie Schwartz says, "Oh, everyone, all the fans are talking about, what you're doing," and they get him on the regular title. So it's one of those things where there's an immediate effect on Batman. Obviously, as you already said, with the covers of Superman and that sort of thing. Of we still see, even if we didn't get a ton of art of him doing Superman, it still has an effect during that during that period, having them on those books. But one of the things is what I always go to, where I guess going
Let
back.
me let,
Hmm?
let me. I just want, yeah, I just want to jump in on that one really quick. I
Yeah.
mean, because a lot of people like recognize him for the Batman art, and he should really be recognized as the guy who saved Batman along with Danny O'Neill.
Yep.
You know, because I don't think a lot of people realize he didn't have to go on Superman. Superman had no issue with his books. His books were selling. You
Hmm.
know, his books were selling at the end of the day. He didn't need that push or that jump start. And with his art and with Denny O'Neill's writing, that collaboration was instrumental in giving people a second look at Batman. So much so that once that was done, you know, they once that was done, the Batman book was almost in the same position it was coming later on, where they were like, "Look, do we need to think about canceling this book?" So you know, and then of course, then you would have the influence that he would have on Frank, you know, on Frank Miller and stuff that would come later. But that's something that he should be, him and Danny O'Neill should definitely be attributed to. That you know, we probably would not have a Batman character in the form that we have right now, or even a title, if they hadn't really given a second and people saying, "Hey, look, no, take a second look at this. Take a second look at what's going on right now in the Batman books."
Well, with the editorial of everyone kind of doing, and they had obviously great talents on the books, but you can see it happen kind of twice where, Neil said he wanted to do Batman and he got pushed out, but luckily the Brave and Bold editor had no issue. He said, "Hey, I want to do Brave and Bold." And it's like, "Yeah, no problem." And then that brings the interest. But I think that even the same thing happened towards who's those guys? If the Marshall Rogers, another artist who passed, was doing backups in Batman, him and Terry Austin, and the editor was just like, "This is the worst stuff. You two are terrible. You guys will never work again." And then the kids are writing in about the backup stories, and then editors come in and say, "Hey, hey Terry, we're putting you guys in the lead. You're gonna do the next story. It's already written by Steve Englehart." And they said, "What do you mean? Joe Orlando is he just reading both of us." And he's like, "No, no, no. Joe's just from the old school. That's just how he learned." So it tells you like sort of the old school type of deal. But it's that's one of the things. A
Yeah,
lot of stuff. Hmm?
you're terrible. You know, you're terrible. You're horrible. You're never going to work here again. Oh wow, look at these numbers. Come on, kid, you're going to the front room.
Yeah. So it's
But the,
we
and
we have
at
that.
the same,
Hmm?
and again to show just how significant it was, because these again the editors, these guys are like, look, we got something that's working here. We're not trying to fix what's broken. We're not trying to fix what's not broken. Okay. And then it takes the readership to say, oh, no, 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 we're interested. We want to see some of it. We want to see more of this. And then it becomes, oh, really? Because if not, they would just, the art would have stayed the same and the stuff would have, and you would have never had a Bronze Age.
Hmm. Yeah, and they did the thing of it is as far as the stories of adding, as you already mentioned, Danny O'Neill doing more detective stories, taking some of the lighthearted. Because at some point, even before, I mean, they already was still slowly starting it, but they hadn't really brought it really totally back to trying to get to what the early stories were, really dark or dark settings and characterization, where you can see them all start to really collaborate. Even having Frank Robbins on there writing, and Julie Schwartz adding in the name Raja Ghul and saying Batman needs a Moriarty type of deal. So yeah, it's one of those things where, but you had that one thing of the person saying, giving the look and giving that look back to him and saying this is kind of how Batman should look. And then you also have Green Arrow, Green Lantern, which even if whether because Neil they said there was some things behind the scenes going on at the comic stores, the effects of the line and the approach of the things when people say, "Oh, realistic comics," they were dealing with heavy issues before a lot of people were doing Green Arrow, Green Lantern, and even where they were having both Green Arrow and Green Lantern kind of get have to learn things on this run. So it's one of those things where you had these, but at the same time, his influence outside of his art looking nothing like some of the stuff that he was doing. He's like, "Oh, with Green Lantern, I just want to get him back to what Gil Kane had done." And then with Green Arrow, it was like, well, I wanted to change the costume, but I wanted to give Green Arrow some cool arrows like Kirby did. So I got to do the costume, but I didn't get to get him some really cool arrows. But with the DC stuff and him firmly planted at DC, one of the other things in comics that is was always frowned upon outside of Kirby being, not being able to go back to DC, but his name being a sellable name, which they, of course, he's one of the few people that didn't have to change his name. When Neil Adams crossed the boulevard to go to Marvel, and then he got graciously met by Stan Lee. When Neil Adams asked to do the X-Men, Stan asked him, "What name did you want to use?" And the fact that he was able to stand up and say, "I want to use my name." He said, "Well, we don't go and cross. You don't really do that." He said, "Well, maybe you don't want me to work for you." No, you can have your name and you get the penciling wizardry of Neil Adams on the X-Men. And this is what you brought up. What brought you to it? Actually, this is it didn't directly. This X-Men run didn't directly bring it to me. It was in the fight with my brother because he went and he tried to always find new artists to say that were his and better than all of mine. And he picked up this British annual of the X Men that has the Sentinel story with Alex Havoc and whatnot, and it's been reprinted 3 million times, right? So people don't look at it; they always look at either Cockrum or Byrne or someone else or Paul Smith. But this is the one, even though it was heavily inspired by the Kirby run, you have that reprint. You got this one that was here, that was one of the decent ones. And then when we were kids, they did the X-Men classics where they had Mike Zeck do these gorgeous covers of it. So it's something that, as far as creators like Byrne, Cockrum, anyone who wants to do the X-Men, the cartoon, they follow that same thing of trying to get the Savage Land in there, the Sentinels, that same sort of run. So it was one of the things where the X-Men wasn't a successful book, and this run, again, wasn't that largely successful, but the effects and people wanting, even not even just artists, Chris Claremont really was a fan of just that. He wasn't actually a fan of the X-Men. He's really a fan of this run and hadn't read the earlier stuff till a long time later. And I think it's not until God Loves, Man Kills is when Chris Claremont started reading the older stories and immediately used some of the older stuff. But yeah, having him on the X-Men, and then of course, the Avengers here, this is in black and white. One of the biggest cosmic, not really a crossover, but the biggest cosmic tales that they did outside of the first Galactus story of utilizing all the Fantastic Four villains in the Avengers and just having a big cosmic story with Roy Thomas. Both runs with Roy Thomas was really something that's hugely influential on comic books, which you could see Marvel try to top every time they went in space and every time you did the X-Men. So this is not even a long period because he kind of, it's like what, 65 to like 74, where his kind of concentration on comic books are there, that we can see this, and then the effects, the ripple that happens after it, as you were already saying, is that you got clones of him. Like you had a few clones in Kirby, like Steranko kind of starting out like that, and Barry Smith starting out like that. And then I think Buscema wasn't a clone, but he said he utilized a lot of Kirby's layouts to sort of do comics and get up to speed with the Marvel style. But then you just
John
have
Buscema?
no, John would say that he would take Kirby's stuff and kind of reorganize the panel, so the art wasn't the same, but just to get up to.
John Buscema is what is it? John Buscema is like one of the few people who you can tell is influenced by Kirby. He's
Mhm.
like literally, it's like a mixture between like American comics and an Italian artist.
Yeah,
When I look at the stuff with John,
yeah,
the influences of both is real there, but so distinctly his own at the end of the day.
mhm,
But that's another show.
yeah. So with that, with the going to what you were saying, we had not even more so. We had, what was it? Michael Nasser was doing it. Rick Buckler, who was coming in, was doing that. There's so many. You already mentioned Byrne. and Bill Sienkiewicz, but even the artist who's not this cover, but Brent Anderson who did Astro City. He was a big Neil Adams fan. There's so many people that it's almost a way to continue what he had done on Batman, having these people who looks did stuff similar like him. Same with Superman. Rick Buckler was doing a Superman that looks similar to like the Superman versus Muhammad Ali, and then you even had Rick Buckler do the Superman versus Captain Marvel, which looked like another version of Superman versus Muhammad Ali. So we had this thing, kind of this ripple effect that was just like keeping comics going and keeping that, even though there wasn't a huge run of comic books like the way Kirby or Ditko run on Spider-Man. You had this effect that spread to the rest of comics, and at the same time, a lot of the young pros were coming to him because he created Continuity Associates, which was an ad agency. But at the same time, they would also kind of connect people with comic book work. So they were doing TV ads and like layout ads. But then when an artist would come that wasn't really that good, and they couldn't get work at comics, I think like Marshall Rogers early, I think definitely Frank Miller, and Terry Austin started as a was a background inker for Dick Giorgiano because they worked together on Continuity Studios. But then this thing where people would come in, they get trashed by Neil, and then he would help them get some work in comics, or he'd give them something that they could do so they could, stay, keep their lights on till they got good enough to do comics. So you had this, and that's the right type of teacher giving you, explaining to you your mistakes and kind of helping these guys on. Where you had like Byrne, Perez, Miller, Sienkiewicz is one of the only ones that he just called up. I think he probably called Marvel and said, "I'm
Oh
sending
yeah,
somebody to you, and you give this guy a job."
I heard the stories. I heard the stories of Miller. He trashed Miller. That was that's so funny because I'm looking at the stuff that Miller. When Miller finally gets on and you see the art that he's doing, you're like, okay, I can understand it. And then he gets to, I think, a high point, and then it looks like he's starting to do the same stuff he did originally when Neil Adams was trashing him, but it didn't matter because he's Frank Miller. He's Frank Miller at that point. I do want to. One of the things that I think I never got a chance to ask him this question was, how do you feel about creators who are signing contracts and waiving their rights to any of the stuff that they're doing after you were so instrumental in pushing forward creators' rights and making certain that people could actually get a piece of whatever they were creating, percentage at the end of the day. I mean, everybody knows the story. Everybody knows the whole situation with Jerry Siegel. Well, probably maybe they don't, but Jerry
Oh,
Siegel and Joe Shuster,
these
and
guys.
how the Superman movie was coming out, and Jerry Siegel wrote this. Uh, he wrote this missive, I guess part screened, part rant, part manifesto, and it got picked up. It got picked up. And remember, this is not in the days of the internet, but this he sent this out to a whole bunch of people, and eventually it got picked up, and then it got picked up by the papers, and DC Warner Brothers was like, no, 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 this is a bad look. We need to try to resolve this. And Neil Adams steps in and he talks with Jerry Siegel, and he's like, "Look, let me see if I can do some negotiating for you." And he was like, "Well, what do you think you can do?" He's like, "I don't know what I can do, but if you let me, come in, I believe I can get you something." And I think that went a long way to it being resolved because since it was Neil Adams and it was not an attorney, because once it's an attorney and it becomes court, oh Lord, everybody's guard is up. Nobody wants to do anything, and then it just drags out. But he was instrumental in he was instrumental in, I'll use his own words, getting something for both Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. But it also set for this whole thing of, hey, look, cut us in. We're making this stuff, and we understand the business. We're not gonna own it, and we understand we're not gonna get 10%. But but don't take it all. You know,
Mhm.
2%. 1%. You guys are making a whole bunch of money on this. That'll be enough. So look, if for any reason I get arthritis, I can't draw anymore. Well, I don't got to worry about paying for particular bills. I don't have to live like Joe Shuster was living for so many years, and he was very instrumental in that. And then we hear these stories now of these guys who are creators, and they're moaning about the fact, oh, my character's going up here and I'm not getting any money. But those guys, and this is up until the 90s, okay, he was instrumental in paving the way. Him, other cats like Elliot S. Magan, these guys were instrumental in paving the way to say, no, you create this stuff, you should be able to get a little something for it. You're not going to get the billions of dollars, but you're
Mhm.
going to get something at the end of the day if this character hits. And I know it worked out for him. It worked out for a whole bunch of other creators. And then these guys now are just kind of like, no, I'm not gonna do it. And they moan about it when when the character blows up in the limelight of film. So I would always wonder how we felt about that. But he was very instrumental in. I mean, we talk all the stuff about. I know a lot of people ostensibly like to credit Image with that sort of stuff, but 20 years before Image, it was Neal Adams helping out Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster and really laying that foundation. It's like, no, you come here, you should be able to get something in return if this character blows up. We're going to make a ton of money off of it, but you can make, you're not going to make a ton, but you can make a few pounds too. So and this is something that should be able to help you out. And some guys really took advantage of it, like a Rob Liefeld, and other guys decided, nah, you can keep everything, and it's never going to amount to anything. What do you mean? What? Wait, it's in a movie. But this was something he was also very instrumental in that, and that's definitely something that shouldn't be overlooked. At the end of the day, it's hard because what those guys, and it was pretty much without too much of a revolution. They didn't have to create a union or any of that type of stuff. This agreement came through, and it was like, okay, fine, and it was no problem. And just over a period of like 20 years, 25 years, it just became like, we don't care. we don't care, just pay me, and I'm gonna come over here and try to make the easier money when I make my own books. But I always wondered what he felt about that. I never got a chance to ask him that question.
I mean, there has been some things where he's been online talking about, not, I don't know if it's post or after this, but they were also, kind of talking union, which is hard to do since, like you have companies like Charlton that could go all reprints towards the end, and which Marvel, in the 70s were heavy on doing reprints, which was almost more, more successful than the regular titles. So let's talk about him doing that, trying to get a bill of rights for creators, trying to talking to Jeanette Kahn about the royalty system and original art stuff like that. So it's everything that you said about him, and you don't have someone who's sitting around there. I don't give money for Man Bat or Raja al Ghul. How could they screw me? That sort of thing of
Mhm.
understanding what the
And
business is,
that's such
fortifying.
a key point.
Hmm.
No, because even at that time, reprints, comic books are initially reprints, and then we go to original material, and then even the publishers know, hey, we do better on the reprints. We sell more with the reprints, and our costs are less with the reprints than we do with the original material. And that's the same thing today. It's the same thing today, where you could come up with a facsimile comic of the first appearance of Wolverine, and that'll beat every new issue. That'll beat every new issue that this guy's trying to sell at the end of the day. Crazy, but uh, you know how much it stays the same at the end of it stays the same at the end of the day. Eh, But yeah, I'm sorry.
No, no. I mean, like being the person who, whether you've talked on our thing of how tough Jerry Siegel could be about this situation with DC, but the person who wasn't, that was Joe Shuster, and he had his moments where he was on. I think he was on a radio show, a television show, where he said, "Oh, so my character's going to be in the Broadway show. I'm thinking how great it is." He said, "What do you think when you saw it?" I can't afford to see that."
Yeah,
But at the same time, as much as negativity towards Siegel, he worked. Joe Schuster was a clerk or a delivery guy, and whenever he showed
yeah.
up at DC, they would browbeat him, saying, "How could look at what are you doing here? You're making us look bad. Coming in here as a what's the name? Like here, take some bucks and get out of here." So
He
there's
was
like,
living with his. He was living. I think he was living
yes,
with his mother, and his mother passed away, and that put him into more dire straits because his vision was not good.
yes,
And so he was like literally trying to sort out what he was going to do. So, he was I mean, he was in a bad way because where Siegel could still write, which which was good because that definitely helped both of them out because he wrote that manifesto, if you will. But Schuster's route was, I mean, for a while I know he was doing those Tijuana Bibles,
Hmm.
and what little art he could at the point, but he had gotten to the point where he really couldn't produce the stuff that would have been necessary for him to stay within comics. Yeah,
Yeah,
but thankfully Neal Adams was there to help him out.
but then smart to know that, hey, okay, I don't have to kill myself with DC. Even though I am talking with Jeanette Kahn, we also have Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers, and that's who we ultimately negotiated the deal because he said that Jerry was like, whatever they ask for, whatever they say, just take it.
Mhm.
And then Warner Brothers said, what are they asking for? And he upped it a lot, and then they came down to a number that was well above what Jerry was thinking they were going to get. So it's one of those things where understanding that you can like doing sort of the right thing for the right reasons, even because he like obviously Jack Kirby had his struggles with people just doing bad pay stubs on his headshots, and then I think he just turned to DC and said, well, when I do these covers, I can correct it, but I don't want to totally change the face. I don't want to do that, which would be different from what he was doing in the Superman Spider-Man thing, where he just was, because Dick Giordano was the inker and the stuff was in the office, and he's just like, this isn't Superman enough. Let me let me redraw like most of the Superman figures where everyone is
Yeah,
just like the same, but same what Romita was probably doing to Ross Andrews Spider-Man, where they're just like, we just want to make this the best thing ever. No matter like when this come out, even if it's like, but no, but I think Neal was more like taking the initiative to do it, and obviously Dick Giordano had no issue with that happen, and he said he also talked to Ross Andrews. So yes,
that, that that wasn't the story. Well, the story I hear it. Well, that's the polite version. I thought more Neal Adams looked at it and he was like, "This is wrong. This
well,
is wrong. I'm gonna fix this up." But that's also the. I always thought that was like the lay of the land when they were working in the at that time, where you could come over and say, "Oh, let me go see what's going on with the let me see what's going on with that Superman Spider-Man story." It's like, this is what you're gonna put in? No, the hell with that. Because wasn't it the same thing? Who was the Spider-Man artist? Was it Ross
yeah,
Andru?
Ross Andrews, yeah. I mean, he was
I
the
remember
artist for the whole thing, but yeah.
yeah, I remember he was looking at certain stuff with I know there was some stuff that happened because there was stuff it went back and forth because there was some stuff that happened with Spider-Man and Ross Andrews was like, no, no, no. We're gonna this is gonna change, this is gonna change, so on and so forth. So, all that stuff I always found to be real funny for the lay of the land at that time. Do you remember? I mean, I'm sure you shook hands with Neal Adams. Do you remember shaking hands with him?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this is for people who never got the opportunity. He had an artist's hands. Like he had an artist's hands, or somebody who works with their hands at the end, works with their hands. He had really strong grip with these like thick, puffy fingers at
Yes.
the end of the day, and that just happens from over a long period of time of of doing the art at the end of the day. So it was great because I would shake and I was like, man, really, you would feel the grip on him, even like, okay, this guy's like 20, 30 years older than me, and you would feel the grip on him at the end of the day, and you realize, yeah, the guy's still in there, not a pinch of weakness in that grip at all. That was, oh man, it really bugs me because I don't, part of me doesn't feel right saying it, but I was just looking forward to seeing him again, asking him some questions, shaking his hand, you know, those type of things. And I mean, it really knocks me because it was like the same situation with I mean, Perez is still living, you know, but I thought Perez was getting better. I know he took, he wasn't doing the cons anymore. He was taking a step back because of his health, but I didn't hear anything negative. So I'm thinking, okay, at least he's stable, or maybe even he's getting better. And then you find out, no, he's terminally ill, and you're like, okay. And then with Adams, the same thing. I knew that Adams had a bout with sepsis, and sepsis is no joke. It's like 70% people who get it don't make it. And he made it. And I was like, well, of course, that's Neal Adams. And I was, you're looking forward to seeing him again. I was like, yeah, maybe I get him to sign this, chat him up, maybe get another interview with him. And then you hear this, and it just like totally knocks you for a loop. The last 2, 3 years have just been a roller coaster of stuff at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard to put it into words when you are expecting to see somebody, looking to see somebody, looking forward to seeing someone, and you're not gonna, and you're not gonna see them. And comic books. I mean, I can put percentages with everything else, okay? But I'm like 100% comic book guy. We're not comic book, well, comic book reader. I don't want to. I'm not really a fanboy at this stage. At this stage of the game, but it's been such a big part of my life. And this is one of the guys who brings you in and keeps you in when it comes to comic books. And then, like I've said before, I don't have the opportunity to meet Herman Melville or Richard Wright or or Homer. I'm never gonna have the opportunity to meet with these guys and say, well, when you were coming over here and detailing, the Rage of Achilles, what was going through your mind? I don't have that opportunity. But I
Mhm.
got to meet Neal Adams on more than one occasion and ask him, well, look, how did you feel about this? And what's your favorite page? And this, that, and the other. And, did you want to do more Superman work? And so it was great for me to be able to make that sort of connection, with these guys, Neal Adams in particular, for this particular show. And then you get, again, you just get the ideas. Okay, uh, time is not on your side, and be grateful for the time that that you do have. Yeah, I don't know. I wish I could articulate this better, but I mean, suffice to say, I was really looking forward to seeing him again. I really was.
Yeah, that's definitely tough. I would since you also mentioned image, one of the things that I think Todd McFarlane said, "Hey, what happened? What if the pros, when they were hot, didn't say it in those words, but when they were big and everything was rolling, they got together and did their own thing. And that sort of happened. It just wasn't, well, no, actually, it's weird because it's like Neil Adams did Miss Mystic for Pacific. And then soon after Pacific kind of went away, he came up with his own comic book line. Now, it's not really remembered that well because we have continuity comics and we have this character Megalith and a bunch of other characters that he did, but the approach and the actual publishing, it was very similar to how what the image followed almost the same model, right? Because it's basically Neil is working kind of mom and pop type of deal, publishing when he can. So it's not a regular schedule thing. Everything that was like totally different from how comics became successes. The fact of most success happened through monthly work, coming out on time, and a good portion of it, like having 100 issues of Jack Kirby, or having 33 issues of Steve Ditko, or Byrne, or this, that, and whoever. But one of the things is like he also had artists that drew exactly like him. Some of them grew into artists that we know now, like Mark Tech, Stack artists, a few others that we look at the book and say, "Oh, this guy's just doing exactly like." No, some of these guys, in the '90s became the prominent stars, where they were kind of the other people that no, they weren't ghost artists because they were credited, but they had that style, and everyone's like, "Oh, they're just doing all the, they're just more Neil Adams clones." And then Image comes along, and they have this guy with a big name, and they have a mom and pop type of publishing schedule where they come out when they can, but the difference is the publicity. And then they had clones that did styles just like them, but it was a success where Neil had stopped production a few times, brought it back in the '90s, that sort of thing. But it was kind of the first of a pro doing his own comic line and having something where there was some sort of draw. People kind of joke about some of the ads that he had done or pulled out for it, but it's just a nice effort that he had done, and then ultimately coming back to comics and putting out some more of the continuity stuff in the '90s. So he'd always kind of been around, even though he wasn't doing stuff regularly. And then, of course, the big coming back with the Batman Odyssey, the coming of Superman, Dead Man, the first X Men, Batman versus Ra's al Ghul, which would be, I think, the last thing he's done. And then he did the Commandy Challenge, where he did like an issue of that. So this like to end your career the right way, whereas he kind of was able to do like publish, like not publish under saying, hey, like I say like who's it, Orson Welles, where you just like, I'm trying to get this project done. I'm just trying to find someone to put this out, and then when he passes, they take one of Orson Welles's I don't know if it was Macbeth or one of his Shakespearean movies that he did that was crushed, that was destroyed by the critics, and then the same paper, the New York Times, re-reviewed it. Glorious! It's the best version of this ever done. And it's like, why didn't everyone, why didn't they give him his flowers then? And not to say that Neal didn't get his flowers, but to be able to be publishing work, well towards the end of the career, which we didn't know it was going to be that. But the comic companies knowing that this is just the right thing to do, whether or not the fans are like, oh, this is too hokey, this is that. And I always joke about like Batman Odyssey to say, there is some things that are kind of wacky, but there's some things that people haven't done yet, which was just like this thing. Like the shots are just. I have this right here. Hopefully, I can pop it open. There's a shot where Batman they put the gun to Batman's face, and I'm just like, this is something that I don't think they should do that, but good lord, the art is pretty amazing. So I think as a talent, and yeah, here we go. I think I got it right here. But this we start out and we got this real nutty shot. So it's not something I would want to see in a Batman comic, but visually, like the guy has, the guy is still doing some powerful stuff. So definite talent. Any other things you want to add towards the end of this
One
before I
of
go
the
on another
better,
hour?
another 2 hours, but better. I think one of the nicest things is that usually somebody like Neal Adams has to pass, and then he gets the month of covers and homages and credit. But and I have to credit DC for this because they I think this was 2016, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
correct. They did a whole month of Neal Adams covers by Neal Adams. So this was Neal Adams doing some of his more iconic covers and doing homages to those covers for the entire. I think, yeah, I think just about every DC cover got one that month. So for like those classic covers for like Batman 251 or for Superman 233, I mean the whole month you got nothing but Neal Adams covers that were done all over the place. And so if you're a real Neal Adams fans and you didn't, or you said, whatever, I'll get around to it, I'll get around to it. Thankfully, that stuff is out there now. I mean, I was always taking my pick of the ones that I wanted, but that is a great honoring of Neal Adams, his talent, his work, and what better compliment to be that type of artist where you're getting called back, you're doing a cover for every book that month, and you're doing homage covers of your covers, and each and every single one of them an iconic cover.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't get, I don't think it gets much better than that. Normally even Stan Lee passed away and we get a month of banners honoring Stan Lee, so on and so forth. And for me, but a lot of that is after the fact. And Neal Adams, I credit and definitely applaud DC for giving him that type of tribute where he could pay tribute to himself, which I think is really appropriate with a guy like Neal Adams. If you ever had the chance to meet him, I think that is right square with the character that Neal, from what I got of Neal Adams, right square where he would be, where there's no one who can homage Neal Adams better than Neal Adams. Okay, and there's no one who can render Neal Adams better than Neal Adams. And hey, instead of getting people to come over here and homage Neal Adams, these guys have been like pretty much in the vein of me, for all these years, for decades. Okay, we got him right here. Let's let him do it himself. And DC did not shy away from giving him work. He worked with DC up until he couldn't wasn't able to work with them any longer. He did I think the last thing he did for them were variant covers for that Joker series,
Mm-hmm.
and all of those were homages of Batman covers as well. You can get them at his store. You can get them signed at his store. Which I will tell people this: if you're a collector, if you want to get stuff by Neal Adams and you want stuff that is signed by him, don't drag your feet. Don't drag your feet and say, well, I'll get around to it. No, pick it up before it gets exponentially more expensive because he's no longer with us, and these things do tend to tick up. So if you see it, you like it, definitely pick it up. Visit his store first is what I would say. You definitely might want to throw some money there, but uh, you know, that 2016 cover run he did for DC Comics, great. I don't know what Marvel's going to do because I know he definitely has some nice stuff over there as well. But I really appreciate what DC did in terms of allowing him to do that, or maybe even working with him to come up with the idea and putting out those covers. It was a lot of good, it was a lot of great stuff, and most creators don't get that. They don't get that while they're living, and I'm happy that he did get that while he was living. That it was not something that became uh, the word escapes me right now, but it wasn't something that came after he left us.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I guess the only other, I think one of the, I guess one of the last big works
Posthumous.
was, yeah, one of the last works he did was a Fantastic Four, and antithesis. It's always tough for me to say, but he got that, and it's weird that where there's DC just said, do whatever you can write, you want to script them, do that. Whereas he partnered with I think artist writer on the Wolverine book he did, and then with the Mark.
Really? Somebody actually wants to take half credit?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but they got a scripter for that, and then they got Mark Waid for the Fantastic Four thing. But getting him to do something like that. So, but I mean, yeah, you had someone who's a great talent, a great effect on the comic industry. Working well into his 70s, doing comic books and doing work in the 70s of a high quality work. We would compare it to the stuff he did in the 60s and 70s, which is a hard thing to do. But, he was a presence and showing up, I think, in one of those, the Action 1000 books. So it's, yeah, it's a definite loss, definite fire that was in the industry that burned, brighter than most, and wasn't particularly kind of. He was kind of pushed. They were trying to push him out from there because I think he went to Joe Simon first, then he went to DC and struggled to get in there, and well, DC.
And can you imagine that? Can you imagine somebody like Neal Adams struggling to get in the comics, knowing everything that he did now?
Yeah, yeah,
In hindsight, the fact that but that just shows the comic industry. So anybody who complains about it is like, hey, Neal Adams had to really work to get into comics at the end of the day. I mean, I hear stories here and there with the art might have been tougher because, with the writing and such, but it's always been such a close knit industry, and getting in, what the joke they like to say is, hey, however this person got in, they wall up that area, cement it over so nobody else can get in there that way. You got to find a totally different way to get in. But the idea that somebody like Neal Adams was literally and he had a day job. He had
yeah.
a day job, which he kept after he got into comics. But the idea that, okay, this guy had to still go through hoops and perform and show improve and so on and so forth to get in is remarkable, is just remarkable at the end of the day.
And it's not to take anything away from what's it? God Loves Man Kills, but they do in this comic book artist here. Which one is it? Number three from 1999. Like he was originally supposed to do the God Loves Man Kills, and he did this. I guess this sequence that wasn't written by Chris Claremont, where Magneto gets killed by these cops. Like I guess be the same hunters that were in the well, so apparently got killed by these futuristic cops, or those hunters that were in the God Loves Man Kills. But he was trying to like have it not be a work for hire thing, and Jim Shooter was kind of saying, "Yeah, we'll try to, we'll figure that out." And then of course they said they couldn't, when it could have just turned into what Marvel had a little while later, which was a royalty program, because they were saying a lot of people were like saying, "Hey, can we get royalties on this Silver Surfer book?" I think the one burner like, "No, we can't do that." And then 2 seconds later, Marvel has, DC has a royalty program, and then Marvel follows suit, and then people are getting royalties finally. So it's
Yeah,
like,
and that sounds just like Marvel. What's DC doing? Okay, we'll do it.
no, it's what Shooter said. Shooter said that, "Hey, I brought in royalties. I did it. I think they did it where DC did theirs first, and I think
Okay.
Marvel called them incentives or something like that."
Mar this will be another show altogether, but suffice to say, well, you know what? I'll save that for another show because that would be another half an hour of talking,
Yep.
and not
So
about and not about Neil Adams, who's our
yeah.
subject.
So I mean, the talent is still there. There's stuff to pick up. I've shown you a few books that I have, and it's the bunch of magazines that you can get from all of the great ones about comic books things. And then I mean, it's not. It never came out, but it's if you read this thing from the Cerebus thing, he talks about his the geoscience graphic novel that he was planning on putting out that is an interesting look at what the approach of two people in a diner talking about stuff. But just definitely a talent, and sorry that he passed, but left a great legacy, behind him for us to still try to for artists to try to to compete with and try to catch because as much as like this I think Byrne was saying like looking at that stuff they were doing with the X-Men we almost did Neil Adams stuff in reverse like we did Magneto, we did the Savage Land, and then we did a big Sentinel story. So you can look at it where they went different was the Dark Phoenix thing, but they were definitely very much influenced. Even like separate on the Marvel team up, they did a Living Pharaoh story. So it's like one of those things where you can see the influence on these guys, and throughout their careers, both artists, writers, everybody. So, anything else you want to add?
Rest in peace, Neil Adams. You will be missed more than you know.
All right, spin a rack.
Out.